Welcome back to part 2 of my NATO tank tutorial. Let's move on with the other tanks. Now the Leopard 1NO is the same as the Leopard 1A1, just a Norwegian version. It does have an extra machine gun though added on. Then you got the Leopard 1A1 NO, basically a slightly worse version than the Leopard 1A5, but is shown by its price reduction of 5 points down to 55 points compared to the 60 points for the Leopard 1A5. Still a reasonably good tank for the Norwegian decks. Now we get on to the M1 Abrams. Now you got the original M1A1 Abrams, a very boring tank to look at compared to the M1 IP and the M1A1, but still quite damaging. 8 accuracy, AP power of 13, HE power of 3, suppression of 121, rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute. Now, that fire rate is actually extremely effective. It's exactly the same as the Leopard 2A4. I didn't really mention it much, but it's an increase from most tanks. The rate of fire of 10 rounds per minute, you will see a notable difference. The thing is with the M1 Abrams, the original one though, is that it doesn't have the 2,275 meter range that the other ones do. It has a 2,100 meter range. A very mediocre tank, but with a decent front armor of 15 at only a cost of 85 points. So if you're kind of looking for a hard hitting tank, but don't necessarily want to pay the full price, then this is definitely something to consider with a speed of 70 km per hour and the front armor of 15, which still is reasonably good for the price. You also get the M2 Browning and an M240 to help it defend against infantry. The M1 IP Abrams, now this is something that I would consider more, purely because it gets the increase in AP power up from 13 to 15 and an increase of front armor from 15 to 17 only for a cost of 10 points, and definitely worth it. So I would tend to go for the M1 IP more than the M1 Abrams itself. Then you got the M1A1 Abrams, in my opinion, the best tank that the NATOs can get. Now, what I was talking about earlier with the packed tanks being more like frontal assault tanks and NATO tanks being more tactical and sort of you only have one of them and you use them to pick off units, this M1A1 Abrams definitely suits the role better than Leopard 2A4s because of the increased accuracy, while it still remains with the same AP power. Now, the only thing that's annoying with the M1A1 Abrams is it's actually slower than the Leopard 2A4, and you obviously get less front armor. They both have very good stabilizers though, the Leopard 2A4 and the M1A1 Abrams, which means they retain over 85% of their original accuracy when firing on the move. Now, yeah, the M1A1 Abrams can relocate effectively and snipe units very, very well with its good accuracy of a 55% hit chance. And I think that's definitely better than the Leopard 2A4. Obviously, it's personal preference a lot of the time, but theory crafting in my head tells me that the M1A1 Abrams should be better at the NATO role compared to the Leopard 2A4. Then we got the M48A1. This is pretty much a similar tank to the M48 A2G, except from the hull is slightly different. The A1 down here has worse speed and a worse fuel capacity, unfortunately. Then you've got the M48 A5. This is a very similar tank to the M48 A2G2, except from, again, different MG and different fuel capacity and autonomy, which is actually slightly better than the M48 A2G2. Then you got the M48 A5 USMC version, which is very similar to the M48 A5, except from with a better gun on the USMC with a better accuracy of 5, but actually a worse AP power of only 9. Then you've got the M60A1, the first Patton, Actually, well, I think all these tanks are Pattons. They're just different versions of them. These ones are like the original Pattons, and then you've got the Pattons that most people know of, which are like the newly redesigned ones, which has an increase in front armor from 6 to 9 front armor, and the side armor is increased from 3 to 4, and the rear armor is increased from 1 to 2. Now you also get an increased gun up to an accuracy of 6 and an AP power of 11, and furthermore you've also got a better autonomy, which will allow it to get around a lot better. Now this M60A1 is actually a very good tank for swarming enemies, and I think it's probably one of the best rush tanks that you can actually get your hands on, as long as you're not driving into anything too heavy like loads of HGMs or loads of heavy tanks. Now we've got the M51A1 Sheridan, an extremely fast cavalry tank, has 7 HGMs of Saklos missiles with 2,625 meter range, an accuracy of 8 and an AP power of 16, and this is really what these tanks stand out for. They only cost 45 points, but they have an accuracy of 8 on that HGM, which is 40% hit chance, which isn't too shabby at all, and with a little bit of veterancy, can put it over 50% very easily, which will make 1 out of every 2 hit. And with 7, generally 4 will hit and 3 will miss. Speed of 70 kilometers per hour, a road speed of 110 kilometers per hour because it's tracked, but you also have to consider that it has a main cannon as well, 1,925 meter range, 4 accuracy, 11 AP power, very mediocre gun, not great. Nothing I would rely on too heavily, but the HGMs are really what you buy the Sheridans for. The rest is kind of just an added bonus. The 70 km per hour speed is very, very nice to relocate them effectively. But if it gets targeted by anything, it's going to die very quickly because it has a low front armor of 2, side armor of 2, and a rear armor of 2, and a top armor of 1. Then you've got the M8 AGS, an extremely small but fast and effective sniping tank. Now, the thing that makes this really good is it has a very good stabilizer with an accuracy of 8, so on the move the accuracy is going to be like between 6 and 7. The range versus ground of 2,100 meters and a rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute is actually extremely good for flanking enemy packed forces which are going for like a full frontal assault. Definitely a tank to consider if you're going to be facing packed armor front on with other heavier tanks. Now, you got to remember that this retains the same price as the Sheridan of 45. It's not necessarily an upgrade, it's just a completely different tank altogether. I think the reason that they put them by each other is because they are both cavalry tanks and they are very, very powerful at their roles. Now this one uses its fast mobile cannon to deal damage, whereas the Sheridan, it uses its fast mobile HGM to deal the damage. And I would say definitely bring both of them in groups of 2 or 3, because that adds up to about 135 points. So in general it's the same. 3 of these is the same as 1 Abrams, and I like these tanks a lot for flanking around, and when they're veteran they can be so accurate on the move, it's actually quite funny. So now we've got the M60 Pattons. These are the ones, like I was saying, people notice a lot more. They're like the patterns that people recognize. The M48 Pattons are the ones that aren't recognized so much, purely because they're not named the pattern in game. The M60A1 Patton has the M68 cannon, 105mm rounds, 1,925 meter range, accuracy of 6, AP power of 10, HE power of 3, a suppression of 121, and a rate of fire of 7 rounds per minute. This only costs 30 points and has an armor at the front of 9, The thing I don't like about the M60A1 Patton though is it's pretty slow at 40 kilometers per hour, but still has that 110 kilometers per hour speed on roads. Now it has a M2 Browning to defend itself against infantry, but the M60A1 Patton, like I was saying with the A1 USMC version, they both are extremely good at brushing. I think if you keep them on roads, their accuracy is surprising when they are stopped. Make sure that you have them on attack move, or at least you stop them by yourself when you have them fast moving down roads. You'll be surprised how many shells they actually land, because although the rate of fire isn't great, they're going to be hitting at least 1 out of every 3 shots, and if it's the first one every time, then you're getting not only lucky, but you're going to be hurting the enemy significantly. Then you got the M60A1 Rise Patton, basically just a slightly better upgrade. You go from 40 to 60 km per hour speed for an extra 10 points, and you also get an increased accuracy and AP power from 6 to 7 and 10 to 11. Now this is again another good rushing tank, but can also be good for defensive maneuvers. A good reactive armor, definitely, because the accuracy of 7 while stationary can catch out a lot of other players. Then you got the M60A3 Patton, and again another upgrade. We go from 7 to 8 accuracy, 11 to 13 AP power, 1925 meters to 2100 meter range, and a rate of fire increase from 7 to 10 rounds per minute. So again, another good increase, but you're paying an extra 20 points. Now still decent value for money. The thing I don't like about the M60A3 though is that the armor isn't increased. So you're basically getting the same hull with a better gun on it, but the thing is with the gun getting better, it definitely needs the hull to support it. Otherwise, in general, the gun isn't going to be as effective because it's going to get destroyed just as easily as a cheaper unit. Then you've got the M60, the Super M60. You go from AP power of 13 to AP power of 15, but the hull changes completely. So you go from 60 to 70 km per hour speed. You get an increase front armor of from 9 to 11, and from 5 to 8 armor on the side. Now one thing to consider about the Super M60 is it's a prototype for the Americans, so not something you're going to be getting on your normal decks, but not really a tank I would generally consider either way. Now a lot of you may find this weird, but I am definitely more of a fan of the KPZ Kyler than the Super M60, mainly because I prefer an autocannon over an M2 Browning. Now the Kyler does cost an extra 10, but it does have better AP power even if it suffers from a slight accuracy loss. But the thing is with the Kyler has a good stabilizer as well, and I think the extra 10 points for the Kyler is definitely worth it over the Super M60 in an all nations deck, although you can't get the Super M60 in an all nations deck anyway, which makes me think that it's not really viable in just an American deck on its own. So now we got the M60A2E1 Starship. These are another unit that I used very, very much for their HGMs rather than their cannons. The thing is with the Starship though, compared to the Sheridan, is that it has a much less accurate HGM. You lose 2 accuracy on the HGM, the AP power stays the same though, and the rate of fire decreases with the Starship compared to the Sheridan. Now the cannon is very, very similar, except from the cannon on the Starship is slightly more accurate at an accuracy of 6. But the hull for the Starship is what makes it different to the Sheridan. Now the Sheridan's a very fast mobile vehicle because it has light armor, whereas the Starship, although it still has the same armaments of a HGM and a cannon, it has a better hull armor of 9 front armor and 4 side armor. Now the thing I don't like also about the Starship is that it's got a much slower speed of 40 kilometers per hour. If you upgrade, you go up to 50 kilometers per hour, but the hull still remains the same otherwise. And the only thing that upgrades from getting the E2 version is you change from a machine gun to a autocannon on the top of the vehicle. Now this can be okay for when you get in like medium range skirmishing, but I think the Starship is a very confused cavalry tank. That's what it feels like. The Sheridan does it perfectly because it's got the speed and it's got the decent HGM that has the accuracy to be effective. The Starship has an ineffective accuracy on its HGM and a slow speed. So it fires off its HGM and it just gets caught out and blown up instantly, whereas the Sheridan can just run away as soon as it's fired. Obviously it needs to guide the missile first, but after it's fired it's not going to get RT'd and it's not going to get bombed. Now the good thing about the M63 is at the end of it you get the MBT-70. Now this is a actually quite effective tank. It has a main gun, an HGM and an autocannon. So unlike the French tanks at the start, which just have a main gun and an autocannon, this also has an HGM, so it's very similar to packed tanks. And it does have the same HGM as the Sheridan. It has a 2,625 meter range, accuracy of 6 and an AP power of 16, and it's extremely effective. Like, I think the MBT-70 is one of the easiest tanks to use if you're trying to get familiar to the game. It has 12 front armor, 6 side armor, which isn't as good as some of the more expensive tanks, but does have a 60 km/h speed, which allows it to move around nicely off-road. We've got a road speed of 110 km/h, which matches the same as all tracked vehicles, but the main gun has also an accuracy of 7 and an AP power of 13 with that range of 1,925 meters. So at 60 points, it's generally in the medium tier, and it does have a gun on its own to deal with those kinds of units. Also has a kinetic autocannon, which as you get closer to the enemy will deal more damage. So if it gets rushed, then it's going to be very, very good at dealing with that. Now that is one thing that in European escalation the MBT-70 was known for, as an incredible anti-rush tank, because it has the HGMs for the heavier tanks, it has the main gun for the medium and light vehicles, and an autocannon for dealing with not only infantry but any vehicles that came close to it. Such a good tank for cleaning up those kinds of rushes. Definitely a good tank though to have in support of heavier tanks, because the AGMs can catch out a lot of packed players. People don't expect the NATO tanks to have AGMs, so when you bring one of these onto the field it can surprise people a lot. So I definitely am a fan of the MBT-70. I used to use it a little bit in European escalation, but I think it definitely suits better in air-land battle because of its synergy with the heavier tanks that you get, like the M1A1 Abrams. So now we've got the last few tanks. We've got the STRV 103B. These are the Swedish tanks that look kind of funny. Self-propelled gun, doesn't have a turret, so it has to turn its entire hull to aim, which can be quite annoying sometimes, and does mean it will take a little bit longer to aim if it's caught out at an angle. But does have a range versus ground 2,100 meters, accuracy of 7, AP power of 12, HE power of 3, suppression of 121, and a rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute, which is actually really good. It has a decent MG to defend itself, but the thing I like about the STRV, costs 60 points, similar to the MBT-70. Shares the same front armor of 12, side armor of 4. Generally it's going to be facing forwards because it's a self-propelled gun, so it's not going to be like swiveled off to the side. It doesn't have a stabilizer because, again, self-propelled, doesn't need one. It's all, most of the time it's going to be stationary if it's firing. And the speed, you don't really need, because most of the time the STRV is going to be used as a defensive tank. Now, the Swedish built these tanks purely for defense. The reason they're shaped like they are is so they can bury themselves in snow, and therefore they're very, very good for hiding in trees and hedge lines that other tanks necessarily can't get in. The STRV is the only tank that has a small size other than the Scorpion light tank. The rest of the tanks in the NATO tree are all medium or big size. It means it gets hit a lot less by enemy troops. Basically, because it's small, it gets a 5% less chance to be hit, which is quite useful, especially in a defensive scenario. Now, with the rate of fire of 50 rounds per minute, you're going to be shooting a lot of rounds off as well. Now, the STRV-103C basically gets an increased gun, but is a prototype unit for the Swedish. So bear that in mind. This one is good as a defensive troop for an all-nations deck, but the STRV-103C is a good defensive troop for the Swedish decks. And it has an accuracy of 9 and AP power of 15, so a huge increase from the 7 and 12 of the STRV-103B. But unfortunately, because it's Swedish only prototype, it doesn't see much action unless you're using specific Swedish decks, which not many people actually do. Then the last few tanks are basically replicas of Centurions. So the STRV-102 is basically a match to the Centurion Mark 6, except from a different MG. Then you got the STRV-102R, which matches the Centurion Mark 11 pretty much, except from a different MG. And finally you have the STRV-104, which is somewhere in between the Centurion 105 and the Chieftain Mark 5. Basically, it's just the Centurion 105 with a slightly better gun and more armor. Not units I would recommend for all nations deck at all. So yeah, that's pretty much all of the NATO tanks. Hopefully this has been useful. If you have listened to this the whole way through, then this was pretty much recorded all in one go. So good on you, and thanks for listening. Hopefully it's been useful. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.